And next up, we have Monika Shankar from UCLA.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to be here. I'm very excited because I actually graduated from Loyola Marymount University. I'm not going to say how many years ago because that's going to reveal my age, perhaps. But I'm very excited to be here today to talk about a collaborative. We're going to talk about shifting gears just a little bit and talk about the dirt beneath us. And I'm going to share a little bit about a collaborative that's been forming over the last couple of years that includes groups from community, tribal, private, and academic partnerships who are all active on urban soils work in the region. And I'm going to highlight both the theory and the practice of this project, emphasizing a new framework for urban soils, and then showcasing how that theory has been put into practice to build a new community-led urban soils praxis. So, to begin, I'm going to start with something that I think many of you in this room are quite aware of and familiar with, and that is that human health and urban resilience are critically connected to soil health. So, on the one hand, healthy soils are essential infrastructure to resilient cities. They provide a range of supportive functions, including urban water storage, filtration and regulation, carbon sequestration, plant support, as we have heard from previous talks already, and many, many others. Urban soils have this tremendous potential to realize more resilient and sustainable futures, both for the cities that we live in and its residents. So, on the other hand, contaminated soil is an important human health concern, as people can be exposed when they accidentally eat or breathe in contaminated soil particles. This can result from living in proximity to legacy contamination and pollution, for example. But the issue was really brought to the forefront in the aftermath of our fires this year, which released a mixture of chemicals into the air that eventually settled into our environments, including our urban soils. But despite this sort of paradox of soils as both an amenity and a hazard, we tend to exclusively manage them as a hazard. So I want to also just bring up a little bit of preliminary work that we did. So a preliminary review of US-based climate resilience plans revealed that soils are primarily framed as hazards that sequester contaminants and are in need of remediation rather than this essential infrastructure. And in an assessment of about the top 50 largest cities and their comprehensive plans, I and a group of colleagues found that more than one-fifth of cities had plans with zero mentions of soils, and over 70% mentioned soils less than 10 times. So, given this, what should or could urban climate resiliency research and planning and discourse look like? So, this is a theoretical framework that I and my colleagues from UCLA, Tree People, and Barnard College created. And it proposes reframing how we think about urban soils in order to activate and amplify their potential as essential for infrastructure. So, when urban soils are exclusively characterized as a hazard, management becomes focused on remediation efforts to reduce the risk of exposure to hazardous soil. And this problem is further compounded when it's guided by sort of exclusive decision making, limited resources, and this siloed framing of soils. And paradoxically, a hazard only framing of soils can become its own source of risk. The hazard framing restricts the proactive management of soils and the ecosystems they support for building these resilient and healthy communities that we're looking for. So this situation is partially remedied and improved when guided by equitable access to decision making and resources. In this scenario, a pathway has been created towards more resilient futures, but it's not fully realized because of this exclusive framing of soils as a hazard. And so when we begin to expand our framing of urban soils to include soils as an amenity, we create another pathway towards more resilient futures by advancing these strategies for providing clean soils. But the benefits can be inequitably distributed if, again, we're guided by exclusive decision making, limited resources, and this siloed framing. And so what we're trying to do here is move towards this top right hand quadrant. So what I and my colleagues are proposing is that we reshape our relationship to urban soils to view them as essential infrastructure in order to enhance the resilience of the urban social ecological systems in which we inhabit. We need to focus on equity-centered approaches to address access to and the management of soil, and we have to ensure that there's sustained investments to their management. So we hypothesize that if this reframing occurs, it can lead to equitable access to healthy soils and services that support this climate resilient futures and the goals that are embodied within that vision. So to meet this challenge of equitable access to healthy soils, we formed the LA Urban Social Impact Collaborative. And this effort aims to leverage university research and resources, as well as apply local and indigenous knowledge to advance equitable access to healthy soils. And while the collaborative was formed in 2024, it actually builds on many, many years of important soils work that was being advanced by community-based organizations and tribal groups, as well as the research that's being conducted by researchers. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what's been going on in this world. Let me start with just an easy timeline. In the first year, the goals of this collaborative was simply to build and strengthen our interdisciplinary and intersectoral partnerships by developing a shared understanding of urban soils. The outcome was a co-developed theory of change, which is something I'm going to share and show you a little bit later in this presentation. But that was the bulk of year one. And in year two, the goal is really just to test our theory of change. Can we take this theory that we have created based on our framework and put it into practice to see if it works? So essential to this process was unpacking and describing in detail the barriers and associated assumptions about urban soils in the region. So through extensive conversations with our partners, many, many meetings, we were able to isolate three key challenges that face LA communities as it regards the paradox of urban soils. So I'll start with the first challenge, which is education and soil testing. So there's a general lack of trust in government characterizations of soil health, coupled with a lack of data on soil quality. So poor data access and inadequate science literacy, it leaves communities wondering how their health is going to be impacted by this proximate soils. So we propose that if education and accessible testing in collaboration with a trusted source are made available to those communities, this will then generate the necessary information for communities to take action. So the second challenge that we pinpointed was one around remediation. This is a core challenge. Our partners' experiences with community cleanups and contamination efforts has led to the perspective that not all types of remediation are accepted. While most agencies will employ a pretty standard methodology, usually a dig and haul approach, alternative forms like bioremediation are not readily accepted. And furthermore, communities are often excluded or at best sporadically engaged in the process of remediation. So distrust in traditional state-led remediation approaches and a lack of access to alternative types is a root cause that has been identified by our group. So we propose that if communities are meaningfully engaged and offered culturally relevant remediation options that are supported by science, this will lead to greater trust in and support of remediation efforts. And lastly is the lack of a comprehensive policy system. In LA, there is no one regulatory body that takes responsibility over urban soils, contaminated or clean soils. So the region lacks a central and comprehensive regulatory urban soils policy. This results in a lack of regulatory accountability, with agencies and departments often punting responsibility back and forth to each other. And it's general confusion for organizations and the communities that they serve. So if a comprehensive soil management plan were to be developed and made available to communities, this would provide clarity and guidance on approaches on how to best address soil challenges. So if we were to tackle these barriers, in theory, we believe we could reach the goals of clean soils, healthy and informed communities, and the necessary policy structure to then protect those communities. But for our partners, it wasn't necessarily just enough to identify the barriers, the what of the problem. Success was also contingent on how we get there. So another major part of this process was honing in on the values that were going to guide our work. And so we developed a set of guiding principles that we center in every single one of our meetings. This includes building trust and mutual respect, practicing consistent engagement and transparent communication, communicating science in ways that are clear, equitable, familiar without being patronizing, embracing popular education as an approach with our community-based partners, and then shifting away from extractive research practices by transparently sharing data and allowing the communities to determine how they'll use that data themselves. So this is half of an image of sort of our final co-produced theory of change. It illustrates how we plan to address this paradox of urban soils as both a hazard and amenity in our region. It was co-developed with our partners to provide a blueprint of how do we get there. And it centers, as you can see here, those three aforementioned core areas of work: soil education and testing, bioremediation and soil stabilization, and lastly, policy development. So we think that by enacting this three-pronged approach, we hope to see a range of outcomes that would ultimately support greater resiliency in the communities and at larger scales eventually. Specifically, we anticipate producing a high-resolution soil quality map and some supplementary soil curriculums that would further our educational goals. We also are going to develop a pilot community soil testing program by learning from a series of soil pop-ups that are actually currently happening. And we're also going to pilot at least one bioremediation project in a remediation-ready site that has been chosen by our partners next year. So with the hopes of providing some proof of concept why bioremediation is a very viable approach to dealing with unhealthy soils. And lastly, we're currently engaging our partners in the process of a policy assessment so that we can kind of hone in on what is needed in order to create a proper foundation from a regulatory and policy perspective to be able to provide that guidance. So I know I'm running out of time here, so good thing I'm on my last slide. I want to conclude just with some photos from some of our pop-ups that have been happening in Altadena. We've been working with fire-impacted communities to help them understand what has been happening in their yards in the aftermath of the Altadena fires. And so this is some of our UCLA students who I think might be in the room, who have been helping with XRF testing and then reporting out on those results. And then just sharing really quickly some key takeaways from this work. One of them is just centering community knowledge can really generate research strategies and actions that have a higher degree of potential for realizing urban climate resilience. This work should focus on building strong partnerships, which are bolstered consistently by operationalizing those co-produced values that I mentioned earlier. And lastly, I think realizing climate resilient futures really means creating community engaged pathways at a systems level. So we need systems level solutions, not just a single strategy that we think is going to be the panacea for our problems. And that's how I'm going to conclude it. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. We have about 1 minute, so one question.
Thank you. In the biological approach to remediation, is it that the the contaminants are overwhelmed, or is there actually transformation of contaminants to non-harmful substances?
I think that's an amazing question. I'm not the biologist on our very broad team. The bioremediation portion of our work is led by the Center for Applied Ecological Remediation. And so the specifics of that question, I don't think that I can answer. I know that there are some folks in the room. Please stand up if that is a question that you are willing and able to answer. But I can circle back around with you on that question and connect you with our partner who's the lead on that.